Have you ever wondered what true power looks like when it wears a silk gown instead of a crown? What if history's most influential queens didn't sit on thrones but moved culture, science, and society from behind the scenes? Welcome to Words of Time channel. In this video, we will journey through the remarkable legacy of the Georgian queens, women who stood beside kings but carved their own enduring place in history. They were more than royal consorts draped in jewels and etiquette. They were cultural pioneers, fashion icons, and moral touchstones who helped shape the soul of a nation. From the salons of Queen Caroline to the artistic vision of Queen Charlotte and the philanthropic grace of Queen Adelaide, these queens influenced everything from the arts and education to the very identity of the British monarchy. Join us as we explore how their choices, passions, and power continue to echo through the corridors of modern Britain. The Georgian era, spanning from 1714 to 1830 and sometimes extended to include the reign of William IV 1830 to 1837, was a period of great transformation in Britain. This era, named after the succession of King George from George I to George IV, saw the rise of Britain as a global imperial power, major shifts in society due to the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution, and significant changes in the role of monarchy, particularly in how the public perceived and engaged with royal figures. One of the most notable transformations was the evolving presence and influence of Queen's Consort, who became increasingly prominent as public figures. This shift was not only symbolic but also deeply rooted in broader cultural, political, and intellectual currents. Women like Queen Caroline of Ansbach and Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz exemplified the changing role of queenship. They extended their influence beyond the private, ceremonial sphere into the intellectual and artistic life of the nation, thus playing critical roles in reshaping the monarchy's image and relevance in a changing world. Queen Caroline, the consort of King George II, was a woman of notable intellect and influence. Her story begins in the early 18th century, a time when the role of women, particularly those in royal or noble positions, was largely confined to domesticity and ceremonial representation. However, Caroline, born in 1683 in Ansbach, Germany, broke many of these conventions. Educated in philosophy, theology, and the sciences, she demonstrated early on a capacity for critical thought and intellectual engagement that set her apart from many of her contemporaries. Her marriage to George Augustus, the future George II, was both a personal and political union, but Caroline quickly distinguished herself as more than just a consort. One of the most significant aspects of Caroline's influence was her engagement with the Enlightenment, a movement that emphasized reason, individualism, and a challenge to traditional authority. While it may seem unusual to associate royalty with such progressive ideas, Caroline managed to bridge the gap between conservative court life and the forward-looking intellectual culture of her time. She maintained correspondence and friendships with many of the leading thinkers of the era, including philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, whose ideas she admired and discussed at length. This intellectual engagement was not merely a personal pursuit, it had real implications for the court and the broader public. By championing Enlightenment ideals, Caroline helped cultivate an image of the monarchy that was in touch with modern thought and capable of guiding the nation through an age of discovery and transformation. Moreover, Queen Caroline used her position to support the arts and sciences in concrete ways. She was instrumental in the founding of the Foundling Hospital in London, an institution that provided care for abandoned children and promoted social responsibility among the elite. This charitable endeavor was both a moral statement and a practical contribution to society, reflecting the Enlightenment's emphasis on social reform and public welfare. Caroline's support for this and other philanthropic causes marked a significant shift in the way Queen's Consort could exercise power, not through direct political control, but through influence, patronage, and moral authority. Caroline's engagement with the arts was another crucial aspect of her queenship. She was a key patron of many artists and intellectuals, helping to foster a vibrant cultural scene at court. Her patronage extended to architecture and design as well, most notably through her involvement in the development of Kensington Palace. The transformation of this royal residence into a center of intellectual and artistic life symbolized Caroline's vision of monarchy as enlightened and forward-thinking. Kensington became not just a home but a hub for discourse, performance, and creativity, reflecting the broader aspirations of the Georgian elite to shape a cultured and progressive society. Despite her achievements, Caroline's influence was not always straightforward or unchallenged. Her relationship with George II was complex, marked by periods of tension as well as cooperation. Nevertheless, she managed to wield considerable power behind the scenes, acting as a trusted advisor to the king and maintaining a significant degree of autonomy in her own projects. Her ability to navigate the male-dominated structures of power and assert her intellectual authority was a testament to her skill and determination. When she died in 1737, Caroline left behind a legacy that would shape the role of queenship for generations. She had demonstrated that a queen consort could be more than a decorative figure. She could be an active participant in the intellectual and cultural life of the nation. Following Caroline, Queen Charlotte, the wife of George III, continued and expanded the model of queenship as both visible and culturally engaged. Born in 1744 in Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a small German duchy, Charlotte was brought to Britain in 1761 to marry the young King George III. At the time, she was largely unknown to the British public, and her initial role was primarily ceremonial. However, over time, Charlotte carved out a distinct identity as a patron of the arts, a supporter of education, and a public figure in her own right. One of Queen Charlotte's most enduring contributions was her patronage of music. She was an accomplished harpsichordist and singer, and she maintained a personal music library that included works by some of the leading composers of the time. Most famously, she was a patron of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who dedicated a set of 6 sonatas to her after performing for the royal family in 1764 when he was just 8 years old. This moment symbolized Charlotte's commitment to nurturing talent and promoting the arts. Her support helped elevate music and musicians within British society and linked the royal court to broader cultural movements across Europe. Beyond music, Charlotte played a pivotal role in promoting visual arts. In 1768, she supported the founding of the Royal Academy of Arts, one of the most significant cultural institutions in Britain. Although the Academy was officially established by George III, Charlotte's influence was instrumental in shaping its vision and ensuring royal support. The Academy became a center for artistic education and exhibition, promoting the careers of British painters, sculptors, and architects. By supporting such an institution, Charlotte helped create a public space for artistic expression and contributed to the professionalization of the arts in Britain. Charlotte's engagement with the arts was closely tied to her vision of monarchy as a moral and cultural guide. She believed that the royal family had a responsibility to set an example in taste, refinement, and intellectual curiosity. This belief extended to her role as a mother and educator. She was deeply involved in the upbringing of her children, particularly the future George IV, and emphasized a curriculum that included literature, music, and moral instruction. Her efforts reflected Enlightenment ideals of education and personal development, and they challenged the traditional notion of royal children being raised solely by tutors and courtiers. Charlotte's active role in education also resonated with broader social trends that emphasized the importance of family and the role of women in shaping the moral fabric of society. In addition to her cultural contributions, Charlotte became an increasingly visible public figure, particularly during periods of national crisis. During George III's bouts of mental illness now believed to be due to porphyria, Charlotte was often the face of the monarchy, appearing in public and managing court affairs. Her strength and composure during these difficult times earned her respect and sympathy from the public. In an era when the monarchy's authority was increasingly questioned, especially during the American Revolution and the early stages of industrial and democratic upheaval, Charlotte helped maintain a sense of stability and continuity. Her public appearances, charitable engagements, and cultural patronage reassured the nation that the monarchy remained connected to the people and committed to the public good. The visibility of queens like Caroline and Charlotte marked a significant departure from earlier models of queenship. In previous centuries, royal consorts had often been confined to the private sphere, their influence limited to courtly intrigues or dynastic alliances. The Georgian era, however, opened up new avenues for queens to engage with the public and assert their presence in national life. This transformation was partly due to changing attitudes about gender, power, and the role of the monarchy, but it was also the result of individual agency. Caroline and Charlotte were not passive recipients of their roles. They actively shaped them, using their intellect, charisma, and networks to expand what it meant to be a queen. Their increased visibility also reflected a broader cultural shift toward the public sphere. The rise of print culture, coffeehouses, salons, and public concerts created new spaces for discussion and interaction, blurring the lines between private and public life. Queens who engaged with these spaces through patronage, appearances, or correspondence became part of the national conversation. Their actions were reported in newspapers, depicted in portraits, and discussed in pamphlets, making them figures of both fascination and influence. In this sense, Caroline and Charlotte were early prototypes of the modern celebrity royal, combining personal charisma with a carefully curated public image. Yet their legacy goes beyond mere visibility. What distinguished these queens was the substance of their engagement. They were not just symbols, they were actors, patrons, intellectuals, reformers who helped shape the cultural and moral landscape of their time. Their patronage of the arts was not a mere hobby but a deliberate effort to elevate national culture. Their support for education, science, and philanthropy reflected a belief in progress and the potential for societal improvement. And their ability to maintain dignity and authority in times of political and personal crisis reinforced the monarchy's relevance in an era of rapid change. The impact of Caroline and Charlotte can be seen in the way subsequent queens navigated their roles. Queen Victoria, for example, inherited a model of queenship that emphasized moral leadership, public service, and cultural patronage, values that had been cultivated and embodied by her Georgian predecessors. Even in the modern era, these principles continue to inform the expectations placed upon royal women. The idea that queens should be visible, engaged, and supportive of the arts and public welfare has become a standard part of royal duty. The Georgian era marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of queenship in Britain. As the monarchy adapted to changing political, social, and cultural landscapes, queens like Caroline and Charlotte emerged as influential figures who reshaped the public's perception of royalty. Through their intellectual pursuits, artistic patronage, and public engagement, they demonstrated that queens could be both private partners and public leaders. Their legacy is not merely one of personal achievement but of institutional transformation. They helped redefine what it meant to be a royal woman in the modern age: intelligent, cultured, visible, and above all, connected to the world beyond the palace walls. Royal patronage in the Georgian and Victorian eras was a central force in shaping British cultural, scientific, and social landscapes. The influence wielded by queens in these periods extended far beyond the decorative or ceremonial. Rather than being confined to the private sphere of the court, queens such as Caroline of Ansbach, Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, and later Victoria, emerged as powerful cultural figures who used their positions to support and advance the arts, sciences, and social institutions. Their roles reflected a broader evolution in monarchy, one that embraced engagement with intellectual life, public welfare, and national identity. The strategic use of patronage by these royal women reveals much about the intersection of power, culture, and public service in a changing Britain. During the Georgian era, which saw the reigns of four kings named George between 1714 and 1830, Queen's consort played increasingly prominent roles in patronage. Queen Caroline, consort to George II, was particularly notable in this regard. Her interest in Enlightenment ideals and intellectual discourse translated into tangible support for scientific inquiry and cultural institutions. She maintained a vibrant court that welcomed philosophers, scientists, and artists. Caroline's intellectual inclinations were apparent in her relationships with key Enlightenment figures like Leibniz and Clarke, and her influence ensured that science and rational inquiry were seen as compatible with monarchy. Her patronage helped to legitimize and promote scientific knowledge during a time when it was beginning to gain broader social acceptance. Caroline's support of scientific endeavors was not merely symbolic. She played a direct role in advancing the position of Isaac Newton and the Royal Society, the leading scientific body of the time. Her court became a forum for the exchange of scientific ideas, and she used her influence to ensure that men of science had the royal favor they needed to continue their work. At the same time, Caroline's interest in collecting and displaying knowledge, from curiosities to natural specimens, contributed to the emerging culture of museums and libraries. Her enthusiasm for intellectual pursuits created a royal model that connected the crown with progress, reason, and the pursuit of knowledge. Queen Charlotte, consort to George III, carried on and expanded the tradition of royal patronage. A passionate advocate for the arts and sciences, Charlotte fostered the growth of several institutions that would become pillars of British cultural life. Her support for the arts was particularly significant, and she was instrumental in the establishment of the Royal Academy of Arts in 1768. Although the Academy was officially founded by her husband, Charlotte's patronage and presence lent legitimacy to the institution. She recognized the importance of elevating British artistic talent, which until then had often been overshadowed by continental influences. The Academy provided artists with training and a venue for exhibition, and it became central to the development of a distinct British artistic identity. Charlotte's engagement with science was equally profound. She took a keen interest in botany and natural sciences, which were gaining popularity during the Enlightenment. Her patronage of Kew Gardens turned the royal estate into a center of botanical research and education. Under her influence, Kew evolved from a private royal garden into a site of scientific exploration, where plant specimens from across the empire were collected, studied, and catalogued. This focus on scientific inquiry aligned with the broader imperial goals of the era, as the British Empire expanded its reach and sought to document and exploit the natural resources of its colonies. Charlotte's support thus positioned the monarchy at the heart of Britain's scientific and imperial projects. Beyond arts and sciences, Queen Charlotte's influence extended to social welfare. She was a key figure in promoting the role of the monarchy in supporting hospitals and charitable institutions. Her involvement with the General Lying-in Hospital, which provided maternity care to poor women, reflected her commitment to social causes. This patronage was not only compassionate but strategic. It helped to humanize the monarchy and connect it to the lives of ordinary people. Charlotte's visits to hospitals and support for healthcare institutions demonstrated that queens could play a vital role in public life, advocating for the vulnerable and promoting social responsibility among the elite. The Victorian era, which followed the Georgian period, saw an even greater expansion of royal patronage, particularly under Queen Victoria, whose reign from 1837 to 1901 marked a high point in the public visibility and institutional influence of the British monarchy. Victoria came to the throne at a time of rapid industrialization, urbanization, and global expansion. Amid this transformation, she sought to shape a monarchy that was both morally authoritative and culturally relevant. Her patronage of the arts and sciences became a defining feature of her reign, influencing not only public institutions but also national identity. Queen Victoria's interest in the arts was both personal and institutional. She was herself a competent amateur artist and maintained close relationships with painters, musicians, and writers. Her patronage helped to foster a vibrant cultural scene that celebrated both tradition and innovation. One of her most enduring contributions was her support for the Great Exhibition of 1851, a monumental event that showcased Britain's industrial achievements and artistic creations. Held in the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, the exhibition was conceived by Prince Albert, Victoria's husband, but her enthusiastic support and public appearances ensured its success. The event brought together technology, art, and industry, and it symbolized the union of monarchy with national progress. The profits from the Great Exhibition were used to establish the South Kensington Museums, including what would become the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Science Museum, and the Natural History Museum. These institutions were founded on the belief that education and culture should be accessible to all citizens, not just the elite. Queen Victoria's support for these museums reflected her understanding of the monarchy's role in democratizing knowledge and fostering civic pride. These institutions continue to bear her name and legacy, a testament to the lasting impact of her cultural vision. Victoria's patronage extended to literature as well. She maintained correspondences with leading authors and supported literary societies. Her reign saw the flourishing of what is now known as Victorian literature, with figures such as Charles Dickens, the Bronte sisters, and Alfred Tennyson contributing to a national literary canon. While the Queen did not single-handedly shape this literary explosion, her court set cultural trends and lent prestige to artistic endeavor. Tennyson, for instance, was appointed poet laureate and became a symbol of Victorian values: stoicism, moral clarity, and national pride. In the realm of science, Victoria was no less influential. She continued the tradition of royal support for scientific advancement, reinforcing the importance of institutions such as the Royal Society and the British Association for the Advancement of Science. Under her reign, science became increasingly professionalized and linked to national progress. She recognized the growing importance of scientific innovation in maintaining Britain's industrial and imperial dominance. Royal endorsement helped legitimize new fields of inquiry, including geology, chemistry, and medicine, and contributed to a broader public interest in scientific education. By lending the prestige of the crown to scientific societies and discoveries, Victoria helped to integrate science into the fabric of public life. Victoria's role as a moral and social leader was perhaps even more impactful. Her reign coincided with significant social challenges, including urban poverty, child labor, and public health crises. While Victoria was often conservative in her personal views, her patronage of hospitals, schools, and charitable organizations helped foster a culture of social responsibility. She supported the establishment of new hospitals and convalescent homes, including the Royal Marsden Hospital for cancer patients and various institutions dedicated to maternal and child health. Her public visits to these institutions reinforced the image of the Queen as a compassionate and concerned figure, deeply connected to the welfare of her subjects. Education was another area where Victoria's influence was felt. Though she did not personally oversee educational reform, her support for institutions and policies that expanded access to education contributed to a broader shift in public attitudes. Her involvement in the establishment of colleges, particularly for women, signaled a growing recognition of the need for educational opportunities beyond the traditional elite. The foundation of Queen's College in London in 1848, and similar institutions, reflected changing ideas about gender, education, and civic participation. Through her patronage, Victoria helped to normalize the idea that the monarchy should play a role in fostering knowledge and opportunity for all. The queens of the Georgian and Victorian eras thus collectively helped to transform the monarchy from a symbol of aristocratic privilege into an institution more closely aligned with cultural, scientific, and social progress. Their patronage was not merely decorative or symbolic. It had real consequences for the development of British institutions and national identity. Museums, libraries, hospitals, and schools that received royal support were not just beneficiaries of funding, they were imbued with a sense of prestige and purpose that came from their association with the crown. This form of patronage also reflected a broader negotiation of power. In a period when political authority was increasingly shifting toward Parliament and the people, royal women carved out spheres of influence that were both public and apolitical. By supporting the arts, sciences, and social institutions, they asserted a form of soft power that enhanced the monarchy's relevance and resilience. These queens did not rule, but they led through vision, example, and engagement. Their patronage was a form of cultural and moral leadership, one that reinforced the monarchy's role as a guardian of national values and aspirations. The long-term impact of this tradition can be seen in the continued expectations placed upon modern royals. Contemporary members of the royal family still serve as patrons of hospitals, museums, and charities, a legacy that began in earnest with the queens of the 18th and 19th centuries. The enduring popularity and legitimacy of the British monarchy owe much to these historical foundations. By aligning themselves with public welfare and cultural advancement, Georgian and Victorian queens helped to shape an institution that could adapt to modernity while preserving its sense of historical continuity. Royal patronage in the Georgian and Victorian eras was a dynamic and transformative force. It elevated the arts and sciences, supported the growth of essential social institutions, and redefined the monarchy's relationship with the public. Queens like Caroline, Charlotte, and Victoria exemplified a model of leadership that combined personal interest with public purpose. Their efforts laid the groundwork for a monarchy that was not only a symbol of tradition but also a catalyst for progress. Through their patronage, they left a profound and enduring mark on British culture and society, one that continues to be felt and remembered to this day. Fashion has long served as more than just a matter of personal expression. It has often functioned as a powerful instrument for social signaling, cultural influence, and political messaging. Nowhere is this more evident than in the lives of Georgian queens, who used their public appearances and wardrobes to project authority, affirm national identity, and set the tone for aesthetic standards across Britain and its growing empire. Far from being passive figures constrained by court etiquette, queens such as Caroline of Ansbach and Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz were active participants in shaping the visual culture of their time. Their choices in clothing were closely observed, documented, and emulated by aristocrats, artists, and the public at large. Fashion, in their hands, became a carefully curated performance of power, status, and taste, one that left a legacy that still reverberates through modern design sensibilities and cultural expectations of royalty. The Georgian period, spanning from 1740 to 1830, was marked by a significant shift in the relationship between monarchy and public perception. As Britain underwent transformations in politics, commerce, and empire, the visual representation of monarchy gained new importance. Portraiture, public ceremonies, and fashion became tools through which royalty could communicate values and ideals to an increasingly attentive public. Within this context, Georgian queens played a crucial role. They were not merely consorts but embodiments of dynastic stability, moral virtue, and cultural sophistication. The clothes they wore were not incidental, they were essential to these symbolic functions. Queen Caroline of Ansbach, consort of George II, emerged as one of the earliest and most influential fashion figures of the Georgian era. Her fashion sense reflected Enlightenment values of reason, intellect, and restraint, but it also incorporated elements of grandeur and theatricality when necessary. Caroline understood the importance of image and self-presentation in maintaining royal authority and popularity. Her wardrobe was a reflection of her intellect and taste, but also a strategic tool. Whether at court functions, diplomatic receptions, or public ceremonies, Caroline's clothing choices communicated her role as both a refined cultural leader and a powerful political figure. Caroline's influence on fashion was both direct and far-reaching. She had a particular preference for elegant but understated garments that balanced the elaborate court styles of the day with a more intellectual, rational aesthetic. At a time when European courts still indulged in opulent excess, Caroline's fashion introduced a degree of restraint that signaled a shift toward a more modern and democratic sensibility. This was not to say she abandoned splendor altogether. Her ceremonial attire was rich with symbolism and crafted to project majesty. But even within these parameters, she exercised a level of personal taste and innovation that set trends. Court ladies and aristocrats quickly adopted her styles, and through portraits that circulated widely, her image influenced fashion tastes far beyond the palace. One of Caroline's most enduring contributions to fashion was her championing of the robe à anglaise, a style that became associated with British national identity. While the robe à la française, with its heavy brocade and elaborate back pleats, dominated French fashion, the English gown favored by Caroline emphasized a more natural silhouette and greater comfort. This style began to represent a distinctly British approach to femininity, graceful, refined, yet practical. Caroline's preference for English styles over continental extravagance also carried subtle political implications, reinforcing Britain's cultural independence and superiority at a time of growing rivalry with France. Her fashion choices also intersected with the arts, particularly portraiture. Artists such as Charles Jervis and Joseph Highmore painted Caroline in a manner that emphasized both her regality and her intellect. These portraits were not merely personal likenesses, they were visual manifestos. The garments she wore in them, often classical in their inspiration, adorned with symbols of wisdom and power, were carefully selected to convey messages about her role as a learned queen and patron of the Enlightenment. The fusion of fashion and art in her public image helped to elevate the status of fashion itself, turning it into a legitimate medium of political and cultural expression. Beyond Britain, Caroline's influence extended across the empire. Colonial elites in North America, the Caribbean, and India looked to the British court for cultural cues. The way a queen dressed in London had ramifications for how women of status dressed in Charleston or Calcutta. This trans-imperial fashion influence underscored the soft power of the monarchy. Even in regions where the crown's authority was contested or resented, its cultural appeal remained potent. Caroline's sartorial choices thus played a role in projecting British identity across diverse and distant territories, embedding the image of a sophisticated and modern monarchy in the global imagination. Queen Charlotte, consort of George III, inherited and expanded Caroline's fashion legacy. Charlotte's approach to fashion was shaped by her German heritage, her deep religiosity, and her commitment to family and morality. Her clothing choices were modest and dignified, reflecting the moral tone that would later come to define the Victorian era. Yet even in her restraint, Charlotte wielded immense influence. She set the tone for a more domesticated and morally upright image of queenship, one that aligned with the values of the rising middle class. Her fashion emphasized maternal virtue and propriety, qualities that resonated in a period of social change. Charlotte's influence on court dress was evident in her adaptation of the hooped skirt and elaborate bodices that marked formal Georgian attire. While retaining the grandeur required by her position, she simplified some aspects of court dress, favoring soft fabrics, pastel colors, and tasteful ornamentation. Her style offered a model for aristocratic and middle-class women alike, bridging the gap between courtly splendor and everyday respectability. By aligning fashion with virtue, Charlotte helped to redefine the aesthetics of power. Her emphasis on decorum over decadence reflected a broader cultural movement toward moral refinement, and her clothing became part of this ideological shift. She also played a role in establishing traditions that continue today. The custom of wearing white for weddings, now ubiquitous in Western cultures, is often attributed to Queen Victoria, but Queen Charlotte's own wedding attire and her influence over royal ceremonies helped to set the stage. Her choices were carefully documented and emulated, becoming templates for ceremonial dress among the nobility and beyond. These fashions became traditions not because they were mandated, but because they were admired, copied, and imbued with royal prestige. Charlotte's legacy in fashion extended beyond her lifetime, influencing the Regency era and indirectly Queen Victoria's reign. By promoting a restrained, virtuous image through her dress, Charlotte contributed to a shift in how royalty was expected to present itself. No longer was fashion merely a vehicle for opulence. It was now a canvas for communicating values: family, duty, nation, and piety. This conceptual shift made it easier for later monarchs to embrace a more modern and relatable image, even while maintaining ceremonial grandeur. In the context of projecting power and influence, fashion offered queens a language that was both accessible and profound. Unlike political speeches or legislative actions, which were the purview of kings and parliaments, fashion allowed queens to participate in public discourse through visual symbolism. Every gown, every piece of jewelry, every hairstyle became a statement. Whether it was Caroline's intellectually inspired neoclassical attire or Charlotte's maternal and modest elegance, these styles were carefully chosen to embody leadership and legitimacy. Their fashion choices were not superficial, they were integral to how power was performed, understood, and legitimized. The symbolic function of royal dress also manifested in the use of iconography. Specific garments or accessories were often laden with meaning. Pearls, for instance, signified purity and wisdom, while sapphires denoted loyalty and truth. The use of ermine, reserved for royalty, signified unassailable status. These elements were not chosen at random, they were part of a visual vocabulary that communicated the queen's authority and values. The strategic use of such symbols in royal fashion ensured that the queen's image could transcend language and resonate across different social strata and cultural backgrounds. Fashion also allowed queens to engage with current events and public sentiment. During times of national crisis or mourning, queens adapted their wardrobes to reflect shared emotions. Wearing black, reducing ornamentation, or appearing in simplified attire helped convey solidarity with the people. Conversely, during moments of national celebration, coronations, jubilees, or military victories, royal fashion embraced pageantry to inspire pride and unity. The queen's wardrobe thus became a barometer of the national mood, reinforcing the monarchy's role as both symbol and servant of the people. The legacy of Georgian queens in fashion is not confined to their lifetimes. Elements of their style continue to influence contemporary fashion, particularly in royal contexts. Modern queens and princesses often draw inspiration from historical precedents set by Caroline and Charlotte. Designers study their portraits, their silhouettes, and their fabric choices to create garments that echo tradition while speaking to the present. The continuity of royal fashion across centuries demonstrates how clothing, when imbued with cultural and historical significance, becomes a living archive of identity and power. Moreover, the influence of Georgian royal fashion extends beyond royalty. Many elements introduced or popularized by these queens eventually entered mainstream fashion. The emphasis on silhouette, the preference for particular fabrics, the combination of comfort and elegance, these were not limited to the aristocracy. As printing technology and media expanded, fashion plates, illustrations, and descriptions of royal attire reached a wider audience. Middle-class women looked to queens for guidance not only in style but in conduct and demeanor. In this way, fashion became a means of social cohesion and aspiration, with royal women at the helm. In modern design, echoes of Georgian royal fashion can still be seen. The popularity of empire waist dresses, neoclassical draping, and even certain hair and jewelry styles can be traced back to the innovations and preferences of Caroline and Charlotte. Contemporary designers often revisit this historical aesthetics, reinterpreting them through a modern lens. The enduring appeal of these styles attests to their versatility, elegance, and symbolic richness. In a world where fashion is increasingly global and democratic, the influence of these queens reminds us that clothing is not just about fabric and fit, it is about meaning, context, and communication. Georgian queens used fashion as a vital instrument of influence, identity, and leadership. Their clothing choices were not merely personal or decorative, they were deeply political and cultural. Queen Caroline and Queen Charlotte each left distinct marks on the fashion landscape of their time, shaping tastes, affirming values, and projecting power in ways that transcended their immediate settings. Through portraiture, ceremony, and public appearances, they crafted images of queenship that blended tradition with innovation, restraint with grandeur, and individuality with symbolic resonance. Their legacy lives on, not only in the institutions and aesthetics they helped shape but in the enduring power of fashion as a tool of influence. Fashion in their hands was far more than adornment, it was a declaration of sovereignty, a mirror of society, and a testament to the complex roles royal women have played throughout history. Behind the crown, queens experienced joys, fears, conflicts, and ambitions just like anyone else. Their marriages had political purpose, yet they also relied on affection and trust. Motherhood added emotional richness and shaped their public roles. Children could bring fulfillment, grief, and personal growth. Their relationships with husbands, siblings, confidants, and courtiers all played a part in motivating their actions, whether in patronage, reform, or public presence. The closer we look at these personal dimensions, the more we see how their humanity informed their leadership. Perhaps the most iconic royal romance unfolded between Queen Victoria and her husband, Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Married in 1840, their partnership was grounded in mutual respect, shared interests and ardent love, a counterimage to duty-bound royal marriages of the past. Albert deeply influenced Victoria's cultural pursuits, from patronage of the arts to the staging of the Great Exhibition, and supported her in political and familial matters. Their bond grew stronger amid tragedy, particularly after the birth of their children and later the death of their son, Prince Albert Edward. Victoria's grief upon Albert's death in 1861 was profound. She remained in mourning and withdrew from public life, wearing black for the rest of her days. Even as her role as monarch required public engagement, her private conduct in memory of Albert shaped both her policy priorities and emotional presence until her death in 1901. Their love story endures as one of royalty's most touching personal narratives. Victoria's deep devotion to Albert affected her government decisions, as she increasingly relied on his counsel. She valued his organizational talents and moral compass, which reinforced her own emphasis on family values, national improvement and personal dignity. His death left a void she filled only gradually, leaning on her children and trusted ministers, but her reign, too, changed direction, growing more reserved and morally austere. Earlier Georgian queens' personal experiences shaped them in similar ways. Queen Caroline of Ansbach, consort to George II, navigated a difficult marriage. Intelligent and cultured, she maintained influence through her intellect, courtly relationships, and refined patronage despite periods of marital distance and political tension. Her decisions to back projects like Kensington Palace reforms and arts institutions grew from her desire to express herself beyond confinement. Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz embraced her role as wife and mother. Her marriage to George III began with enchantment but, over time, gave way to complexities, including his mental illness. Charlotte stayed by his side during crises, shouldering both familial worry and public duty. As a mother, she championed education and culture in her children's upbringing, reflecting her personal values of learning and moral instruction. These queens, while constrained by expectations of decorum and dynastic obligation, were driven by personal considerations: loyalty, love, grief, moral conviction, and a desire for meaningful expression. Their engagement with art, science, charity, or public visibility were not just political maneuvers. They reflected inner priorities and emotional needs. Having children was a central part of their identity. Queens invested heavily in their offspring's upbringing, education, and moral training, which shaped succession and national continuity. Victoria and Charlotte raised large royal families in an atmosphere that valued education, morality, and responsibility, baking in the values they cherished. Their maternal roles gave them emotional depth and public relatability, showing that behind the formal crown was a woman of care, concern, and personal investment. Personal loss marked many queenship experiences. Victoria's lifelong grief is the most famous, but others endured stillbirths, miscarriages, political betrayals, and strained family relations. Caroline suffered personal disappointment when rivalries at court and tensions with her husband threatened her position. Charlotte coped with the weight of a mentally ill king and the responsibilities of a growing family. Their emotional resilience in the face of suffering shaped public perceptions, turning them into symbols of strength and dignified endurance. Examining their personal lives reminds us that queens were not symbols only, they were emotional beings whose decisions were shaped by their relationships. The marriages, friendships, sorrows, and joys they experienced influenced how they led, what they supported, and how they were remembered. Their lives were not just public pageantry. They were human journeys with profound emotional resonance. The Georgian queens left an indelible mark on British history, not only through their proximity to power but through their personalities, passions, and persistent cultural influence. As consorts to the kings who ruled during the long 18th century, from the accession of George I in 1714 to the death of George IV in 1830, these women were more than ceremonial figures. They became symbols of stability, taste, and moral guidance in a rapidly changing Britain. Their legacies endure in the institutions they supported, the fashions they inspired, and the societal attitudes they helped shape. Queen Caroline of Ansbach, Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, and Queen Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen each navigated their roles with varying degrees of influence and visibility, yet all contributed meaningfully to the cultural and social tapestry of Britain. Queen Caroline, wife of George II, was known not only for her political savvy but also for her fierce intellect and commitment to Enlightenment ideals. Her legacy lies in how she subtly reshaped the monarchy into a more culturally engaged and intellectually respected institution. At a time when the British monarchy had limited direct political power, especially under the growing dominance of Parliament, Caroline's behind-the-scenes role as advisor to her husband and liaison with influential politicians helped preserve royal relevance. But her impact extended far beyond politics. Caroline was a generous patron of the arts and learning. She supported philosophers like George Berkeley and writers like Jonathan Swift. Her influence extended to the founding of libraries and the popularization of scientific knowledge, particularly through her association with the Royal Society and figures like Isaac Newton. She helped transform the court into a site of intellectual engagement and progressive ideas, giving the monarchy a forward-facing cultural role that remains important today. Caroline's patronage of public works and the arts demonstrated that queens could be cultural leaders as well as political wives. She promoted the arts not just as ornamentation for the elite but as a civilizing force for society. She also oversaw the expansion of the royal gardens and contributed to the development of Kew Gardens, which became a site for scientific exploration and botanical research. Through these actions, Caroline laid a foundation for the monarchy's enduring association with national heritage, science, and intellectual endeavor, an association that remains part of how the British crown is perceived globally. Queen Charlotte, wife of George III, built on Caroline's cultural foundation but added a deep personal investment in moral virtue, education, and family life. Her legacy is particularly potent in the fields of music and the visual arts. A passionate supporter of musicians, including the young Mozart, Charlotte cultivated a court in which music and artistic expression flourished. She was instrumental in founding the Royal Academy of Arts in 1768, an institution that remains central to British artistic life. Her patronage provided essential support for painters like Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough, whose work helped define British artistic identity in the 18th century. Through these actions, Charlotte ensured that the crown remained a source of creative inspiration and validation, further intertwining monarchy with national culture. But Charlotte's legacy was not limited to high culture. Her strong moral convictions and sense of duty helped reframe the monarchy during a time of personal and political upheaval. As George III suffered bouts of mental illness, Charlotte stepped into a more prominent role, managing both her household and aspects of public life. Her emphasis on family, modesty, and personal responsibility helped reorient the image of the monarchy toward one that valued domestic virtue and ethical leadership. These values would go on to define the early Victorian era and remain part of the royal brand even today. In her role as mother to 15 children, Charlotte emphasized education and moral development, especially for her daughters, thus subtly pushing the idea that queenship included intellectual and ethical stewardship. Queen Adelaide, though less publicly visible than her predecessors, had a significant social legacy. As consort to William IV, she came to prominence at a transitional moment between the Georgian and Victorian worlds. Her devout Christian faith and interest in charitable works set a precedent for the more visibly moral and philanthropic monarchy of the Victorian era. She supported the construction and restoration of churches, funded hospitals and schools, and lived modestly compared to earlier royal figures. Her name endures in places like Adelaide, Australia, a testament to how the reach of British queens extended far beyond the British Isles. One of the most visible areas of lasting influence from Georgian queens lies in fashion. Caroline and Charlotte in particular set trends that transcended their social class and geography, influencing the wardrobes of elite and middle-class women across the British Empire. Queen Caroline favored elegant but restrained styles that suggested Enlightenment reason and refinement, while Queen Charlotte embraced a more ornamental aesthetic that was nonetheless underpinned by personal dignity and modesty. Their fashion choices helped define femininity for generations of women and establish the Queen as the ultimate arbiter of taste. These legacies are still evident in how royal women today, such as Catherine, Princess of Wales, or Queen Camilla, are judged for their style choices, often framed in terms of tradition, modesty, and grace. Perhaps most significantly, the legacy of the Georgian queens is seen in the evolving role of the monarchy itself. Their influence helped transform the crown from a political powerhouse into a cultural institution. By embracing the arts, championing social causes, and embodying moral leadership, they created a model of queenship that informed how later consorts and even reigning queens like Victoria and Elizabeth II approached their roles. This shift laid the groundwork for a modern constitutional monarchy whose influence is largely symbolic and cultural but no less powerful in shaping national identity. Understanding the lives of these queens also allows us to better understand the broader historical context of the Georgian era, a time of empire, industrialization, and social change. Their experiences reflect the tensions of their time between tradition and progress, monarchy and modernity, power and restraint. Their personal decisions and public roles intersected with major historical movements: the Enlightenment, the rise of the middle class, religious revival, and the expansion of empire. In this way, their legacies help historians, scholars, and the public better grasp how British society evolved, and how the monarchy adapted in order to survive and remain relevant. Moreover, the institutions they supported continue to thrive today. The Royal Academy, the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, numerous churches, schools, and hospitals owe their origins or development to the interest and advocacy of these queens. Their portraits hang in galleries and museums, their names grace cities, streets, and public buildings, and their examples are cited when current royals engage with the public. The sense of royal duty so often associated with modern monarchy has deep roots in the character and behavior of Georgian consorts, who used their positions not only for personal influence but for public good. Their cultural impact was not always immediate or dramatic, but it was persistent and cumulative. Over time, the values and behaviors they modeled became woven into the expectations of queenship itself. They balanced visibility with reserve, taste with modesty, and tradition with innovation, qualities that continue to define how the monarchy operates in a contemporary setting. The Georgian queens may have lived in a different world, but the outlines of their legacy remain visible in Britain's cultural institutions, social ideals, and the monarchy's carefully maintained public image. The legacy of the Georgian queens is one of transformation, resilience, and enduring influence. They were instrumental in repositioning the monarchy as a cultural and moral force during a period of immense change. Their support for the arts, sciences, education, and charity helped create the modern concept of a monarchy that serves not just to rule, but to inspire and elevate the nation. Through their fashion, philanthropy, personal conduct, and patronage, they left behind a model of queenship that continues to inform how royal women are perceived, evaluated, and remembered today. Their story is not just one of personal strength and public influence, it is also a vital chapter in the broader narrative of Britain's social and cultural evolution. The legacy of the Georgian queens stands as a testament to the evolving nature of monarchy and the quiet, persistent power of influence wielded beyond thrones and titles. These women, born into or married into a life of intense visibility and constraint, transformed their positions into platforms for meaningful cultural, social, and historical contributions. Though they lived within a framework shaped by patriarchal traditions and political limitations, they navigated that framework with intelligence, creativity, and foresight, leaving behind a legacy that continues to shape the monarchy and the wider society in which it resides. Their lives were lived against a backdrop of sweeping change: political revolution, industrial advancement, colonial expansion, and shifting social norms. Within this context, the queens of the Georgian period, most notably Queen Caroline of Ansbach, Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, and Queen Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen, played roles that were at once personal and national, domestic and symbolic, ceremonial and deeply substantive. They demonstrated that a queen consort could be far more than an ornament to the crown. She could be a powerful mediator between tradition and progress, between the court and the people. Queen Caroline's embrace of Enlightenment ideals and intellectual life brought philosophical inquiry and scientific learning into the heart of the monarchy. Her support of thinkers and artists helped solidify the notion that the British court could be not just a seat of political authority but a beacon of cultural excellence and curiosity. She paved the way for future royal patronage to be understood not simply as a means of glorifying the crown but as an investment in the intellectual and artistic capital of the nation. The institutions she supported, the relationships she cultivated, and the values she exemplified became enduring models of how royal influence could be applied to the betterment of society. Queen Charlotte took this mantle and expanded it, becoming a cultural mother of the nation. Through her support for music, visual art, education, and philanthropy, she extended the Queen's sphere of influence into the lives of ordinary citizens. Her promotion of artists, musicians, and educators not only elevated Britain's artistic reputation but also contributed to a broader culture of moral refinement and aesthetic appreciation. Her commitment to family values and her dignified presence during times of national strain helped to reframe the monarchy as a moral compass for the people, a vision of queenship that strongly influenced the Victorian image of royal duty. Queen Adelaide, perhaps less well known, nonetheless carried these ideals into a more modern era, bridging the late Georgian world with the dawn of Victorian sensibilities. Her life embodied humility, piety, and devotion to charitable causes. In doing so, she helped redefine what was expected from a royal consort, shifting public expectations toward philanthropic engagement and moral leadership. Her legacy, while quieter than her predecessors, can be seen in the values that defined the royal household in the 19th and 20th centuries: simplicity, modesty, and service. One of the most significant aspects of their legacy lies in their ability to redefine power not as brute authority or political dominance, but as cultural, emotional, and symbolic influence. These queens wielded soft power with deftness and subtlety. They set trends, modeled values, and aligned the monarchy with progress, taste, and empathy. Whether through Queen Caroline's intellectual salons, Queen Charlotte's artistic sponsorships, or Queen Adelaide's philanthropy, their decisions and demeanor helped recast the monarchy's relationship with its people. Fashion, too, served as a strategic language through which these women communicated ideals of leadership, identity, and national character. They became living symbols of what it meant to be British, feminine, and regal. Their garments, hairstyles, and accessories were not simply matters of vanity, they were tools of diplomacy and projection, reinforcing values of refinement, stability, and continuity. In the process, they helped shape not only British fashion but also the nation's understanding of how image and symbolism contribute to power. Their legacies are deeply entwined with the evolution of Britain itself. Through their support of educational institutions, museums, libraries, botanical gardens, and charities, they contributed to the cultural infrastructure that continues to serve British society today. These were not passive or ornamental contributions, they were the active work of individuals committed to nurturing the soul of a nation. In many ways, they anticipated the modern role of the monarchy as a custodian of heritage, a supporter of social welfare, and a symbol of national identity. Understanding their lives also offers insights into the broader Georgian era, a time characterized by paradoxes. It was an age of refinement and brutality, enlightenment and exploitation, wealth and poverty, tradition and revolution. The queens who lived through these contradictions did not ignore them, they navigated them with complexity. They stood at the crossroads of old and new, embodying the tensions and hopes of their time. Through them, we gain a richer understanding of how history is shaped not only by battles and laws but by relationships, values, and visions. Their enduring relevance is perhaps best captured in the ongoing public fascination with the monarchy. Today's royal women from Queen Elizabeth II to Catherine, Princess of Wales inherit a model of queenship forged during the Georgian period. The expectations placed upon them to be culturally attuned, morally upright, charitably engaged, and sartorially influential are directly traceable to the standards established by their Georgian predecessors. This inheritance is both a burden and a legacy, one that carries with it centuries of precedent, symbolism, and quiet transformation. The Georgian queens left behind more than portraits and palaces. They left behind a vision of what monarchy could mean in a changing world. They taught us that power does not always need to be loud to be lasting, and that influence rooted in character, taste, and conviction can ripple through generations. Their impact on fashion, the arts, social reform, and the moral identity of the crown remains embedded in Britain's cultural memory. As we continue to examine their lives, we are reminded that history is often shaped not only by those who rule openly but also by those who lead with grace, wisdom, and quiet strength.